はい。 Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now, here's your host, Dave Palmer.
And welcome to this week's edition of Back to the Father here on all the Guadalupe Radio Network social media sites, on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. This is a program that is about philosophy. It's about the philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas in particular. It's based on my favorite encyclical called Aeterni Patris by Leo XIII back in 1879 when he wrote about the restoration of Christian philosophy according to the mind of St. Thomas Aquinas. And this idea is picking up steam. You know, I have been watching a series of videos by Dr. Peter Kraft from Boston College, and this whole idea of the dismantling of this awesome philosophical system from the scholastic age that Aquinas put together by all of these subsequent philosophers over the last 500 or 600 years is really a big topic of conversation. So that's what we talk about here. We always start off with a segment on something related to St. Thomas Aquinas and his teaching. And last week, I was on CDT, Catholic Drive Time, with Adrian and Tito, and Adrian said, hey, can you talk about the Ascension next week? And I said, yeah, sure, why not? So this morning when I was on with him, I said, hey, I haven't gotten the email yet about what we're talking about next week. So Adrian pretty much programs this show, okay? But anyways, we're going to be talking about the Ascension because that was the solemnity that you either celebrated yesterday or Sunday, depending on, your diocese and the particular practice of where you are. I went to Mass yesterday because our diocese had it as a holy day of obligation in the ordinariate. I don't know about you.
Yeah, traditional Latin Mass, we have it as a holy day on Thursday.
Thursday, okay. Sissel, how about you? Was it moved to Sunday for the Fort Worth Diocese?
It was moved to Sunday for the Fort Worth Diocese.
Okay. We won't look down upon you. It's all good.
I celebrated from home yesterday.
Yeah. No, actually, in our family, because our daughter was not available last night, we said, well, you can go to the Novus Ordo on Sunday because then you're still getting the solemnity in, but my wife and I went last night, and so
why not celebrate it twice?
That's right.
Yeah,
it's that good of a feast, right? Celebrate it twice. And so, anyways, we're going to talk about that, and then in the second segment of the program today, I'm so excited. I'm going to introduce you to the philosophy of 19th century founder of existentialism, Protestant philosopher Soren Kierkegaard. Now, I get all excited because I just love philosophy, and there's a lot to like about him, and there's also a lot to not like. At least he was a Christian, and he did not give up his Christian faith. In fact, he was a very scrupulous Christian, and I would even say a gloomy Christian, which I think is a kind of a oxymoron. You shouldn't be a gloomy Christian, but his writing was morose and melancholy, and why was that the case? And so we'll talk about Soren Kierkegaard. He came up with the expression "a leap of faith." They talk about the leap of faith all the time. He came up with the word angst. Okay, we hear about. I mean, seriously, that was a word that he invented.
That honestly, based on the little bits that I've researched on him and like in the email and things like that you sent out about him being gloomy, that just cracks me up that he came up with that word.
I know. But we'll talk about why that was. Again, he lived in the 19th century. This was after the Protestant Reformation. He was very much influenced by Martin Luther, and quite frankly, without being too mean to the Protestants, I think he was too influenced by the Protestant tradition. I mean, he didn't like organized religion. Let's just say that. But we'll get into that in the second segment, and then in the third segment, at approximately 40 after, that's when we open up the phone lines. We open up the chats, and we want to know what you think about all of it. You can chat anytime during the show, but in particular, we don't have anything set for the third segment other than open discussion, and William and Sissel will kind of give their thoughts as well. My goal is to try to make this not too deep. I know it's hard, because not everybody thinks philosophically. A lot of people, it's just very challenging to them. I enjoy it a lot. So anyways, that's what we're going to be doing on the show today. And I thought it was kind of interesting when, this first slide here says, you think, therefore, you're a philosopher. Dr. Peter Kraft opened up his series saying, you can't not be a philosopher, because even if you say I'm not a philosopher, well, that is a philosophy. So he said you cannot not be a philosopher, okay, to use a double negative. All right, I've already kind of introduced Sissel and William, but that is Sissel, and she's back. Welcome back to the show.
Hello. Thank you. It's great to be back. I am really proud of William and all of y'all for doing this without me. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, you didn't think we could do it, did you?
No, I actually have full confidence. Not that I left like 4 pages of notes or anything, but
no,
not
wouldn't
at all.
have done that.
No, and I was really excited. I was hoping I'd be able to tune in because I was on the road, not driving, by the way. I was in the back seat. Tried to listen in, and then we hit a very dead zone in the middle of Kansas, so I couldn't. I lost connection.
Lost it, huh?
But the bits that I saw looks really good, so I'm happy to be back and learn more.
Yeah, all right. Very good. And William had a birthday this week. He turned 18 years old, so happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
Good week celebration, did you?
Yeah, it was good. It was a good week. Exciting. Yeah, it's cool being 18.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Well, happy birthday to
Thank
you.
you.
All right. Well, let's dig right into
By
it.
the
And
way.
again, this next slide kind of shows you, I've already explained it pretty much, what we're going to do. So the Ascension, first segment, review of Kierkegaard, and then third segment, open discussion. Okay. I want to show you also this little timeline that I'm putting together according to all the philosophers that we talk about. And you see where Kierkegaard fits into this. And the reason I like to do this is because they all influence each other. Kierkegaard, for example, was very, very much influenced in a negative way by Georg Hegel. He hated the Hegelian system. I don't know if you guys know much about Hegel. Put this like master system of the progression, very historical, how the world is kind of moving towards a more enlightened state. And Kierkegaard totally hated that. And so he reacted against that. He was, before Nietzsche, after Pascal, after Occam, he was in what's called the Romantic period after the Enlightenment. So you kind of have to understand when these people lived, because we're all products of our age, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's kind of like, you can't live in this age without being influenced by technology. Right. Yeah, you can say, I'm not going to use it, but it doesn't matter. Everybody else around you is. I mean, Yeah. And so, we're all products of our age. So, anyways, very interesting philosophy of Kierkegaard, and we will talk about that in the next segment. So, all right, let's get to the Ascension of our Lord, which again we celebrate this week. And I think there's a tendency a lot of times to just, every time this feast rolls around 40 days after Easter, we're just like, oh, okay, Jesus ascended, and that's kind of cool. And, went into heaven, was with his disciples for 40 days, and then, shot up into the sky and went to heaven. And, okay, on to the next one. When's Pentecost going to be, So these are the 6 questions that Aquinas asks in question 57 of what's called Tertia Pars, the last part of the Summa. And you remember I said, why did it take so long for Aquinas to introduce the incarnation and Jesus? I know I talked about that, didn't I? Mm. It's like, you're not going to understand Jesus if you don't understand divine nature and human nature. So he spends the whole first part of the Summa talking about divine nature, angelic nature, human nature. And it's really, if somebody didn't know about Jesus and they were taught about divine nature, which is just like absolutely like overwhelming in a good sense because it's so high above us, right? And they get their head a little bit around divine nature, and then they learn about human nature, and they're like, oh, okay, wow, that's pretty interesting too. And then they were to say, what if a person had both of them? Okay, and I think it would just blow us away, But we've been so accustomed to learning about Jesus, true God, true man, that I think we're a bit jaded by it. But it's really fascinating to think that a person could have both of these natures, could have a human intellect, a divine intellect, a human will, a divine will, passions, all, in one person. I mean, it's wild. And so that's going to have something to do with this whole ascension of Jesus Christ. So, all right, so we'll go through these kind of quickly. Here's a little pro tip. Whenever Thomas says, was it fitting, in the Summa? The answer is
yes.
always because
It's kind of a leading question.
I know.
Rhetorical question,
Yeah, like, or he'll say something like, is fortitude a virtue? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anytime he says, was it fitting? What he really means is, why was it fitting?
Yeah.
Okay, so
I was going to say, for any philosophy students out there, that's a pro tip for your quizzes and exams. But I guess if you have to explain the why, it might be a little bit more complicated.
True or false? If he says, was it fitting? The answer is always yes. Okay, was it fitting for Christ to ascend into heaven? Yes. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Okay, so now he says whether Christ's ascension into heaven belonged to him according to his divine nature. Now, this is kind of interesting here. Okay, so when he ascended into heaven, did he do it according to his divine nature? Now, I'm only going to share one little paragraph about this, but, and then those of you out there watching in social media land, go ahead and guess, because he is human and he is divine. He's got a body. He's also got full divine nature. So did he ascend into heaven according to his divine nature? Okay. So you guys want to jump in at all, or let me go straight to the? And I'm only showing one part of the answer. Okay, so you may say something.
I guess I would like to try to answer, but I'm also not entirely sure what he means by belong to him.
Okay,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good question.
It's just the wording of it is a little bit odd, and I'm not sure if it's just like the translation, or if it's just.
Yeah, especially since the next article said, did he ascend by his own power?
Right, because when I saw this question pop up, I'm like, I know we talked about this in like the email and things like that, so I was like, is this the same question or is it a different question? What's happening?
Well, that's it. You got to define your terms. Did it belong to him according to his divine nature? And that, I didn't even think about that. That's a very interesting question.
I ask all the good questions.
It's interesting because later on in the Summa, Thomas is going to ask these very interesting questions, like, basically, like when we talk about the incarnation in Jesus Christ, the hypostatic union, right? Is it accurate to say things like God laughed or God ate fish? And he's going to come down as saying, yes, okay, God did do that. Why? Because you have the hypostatic union, one person. So anything, in Thomas's words, that predicated of the person, you can say according to each nature. Okay, does that make sense? Or did yeah, because it's kind of like did Mary give birth to God? You would say yes, right?
Yes,
okay, why?
Absolutely.
Because she gave birth to a person, and that person was God, right? So, all right. So let me kind of read this paragraph here. The next slide. He says the expression according to can denote two things: the condition of the one who ascends and the condition of his ascension. When taken to express the condition of the one ascending, the ascension is no wise belong to Christ according to the condition of his divine nature, which is kind of surprising to me, both because there is nothing higher than the divine nature to which he can ascend. Okay, so he can't ascend. If he's divine, he can't ascend to anything higher than that because he's, and also because ascension is a local motion. A thing cannot, in keeping with the divine nature, which is immovable and outside of all place, yet the ascension is in keeping with Christ according to his human nature, which is limited by place and can be the subject of motion. So basically, as he's ascending into heaven, he's doing it according to his human nature, which is I think what he's saying is the divine nature can't move. Okay, because divine nature is, remember, one of the traits of divinity is that it is infinite. It's everywhere, right?
Present,
yeah, it's everywhere. So you can't move divine nature, which is all the more makes the hypostatic union all the more interesting. Okay, all right. So now
I love St. Thomas Aquinas. He thinks of all the things I never think about.
I know. So okay. So now he says, did he ascend by his own power? Now that one makes a little bit more sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So when Jesus is on the earth and he decides, hey, I think I'm out of here. Okay, I'm going up, and he physically ascends into heaven. Was that the divine power that worked in him, or did he do it on his own power? Now, this is very, very applicable to us for reasons I'll explain in a second. But do you want to take a guess? Or is anybody out there?
Do you want me to catch you up on some comments real quick?
Yeah,
absolutely. So We have a few people joining us, including the entirety of CDT, because Catholic Drive Time is commenting. So,
Oh, is Tito also?
No, it's
or-
Adrian.
Oh, okay.
He's
Catholic
now
Drive
started
Timers,
adding who is
okay.
writing.
Okay.
But he said, "Oh, great! I think this is a good tagline for the show, Dave. You're talking about making, philosophy more understandable, St. Thomas Aquinas, and he says make it understandable to people who are mostly asleep." And so I said, "That's fair." Also, by the way, he says, "Congratulations to William. You can vote, but you can't drink or rent a car or a hotel." So those things to look forward to.
It's true.
Yeah. So can't rent a car.
Yep.
Can't drink.
Yeah, drink. Yep.
Okay.
So
Although if you're at a restaurant with your parents, you can do
can,
it.
yeah.
Yeah. But
That's
they
true.
have to give it to your parents, and they have to give it to you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That
We
makes
allow our
sense,
18-year-old daughter to drink at restaurants, but I have to buy it and give it to them.
Okay, yeah.
Well, it's funny. I think at 18 you can serve alcohol in restaurants. Like you can,
Yeah,
if you're a
yeah.
waitress, you can bring
Yeah.
things over, but you can't under that age. So you have to get someone else to get it for you.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Boy, I really sent us off in a
Sorry.
tangent, didn't I?
Yeah,
Actually,
no,
Adrian did.
that's Adrian's fault.
All right.
No, yeah. So I don't think we have any comments specifically about this question yet.
Oh, okay.
So I have no idea how this is going to be answered.
All right. Okay. Well, that's why we go to the expert here now. Okay. So here we are. Next slide. He says others assign as the assign as the cause of this power the glorified soul itself, from whose overflow the body will be glorified, as Augustine writes. Okay, I'll explain this. For the glorified body will be so submissive to the glorified soul that, as Augustine says, wheresoever the spirit listeth, thither the body will be on the instant, nor will the spirit desire anything unbecoming to the soul of the body. Now it is befitting the glorified and immortal body for it to be in a heavenly place. Consequently, Christ's body ascended into heaven by the power of his soul willing it. But as the body is made glorious by participation with the soul, even so, as Augustine says, the body is beatified by participating in God. Consequently, the divine power is the first source of the ascent into heaven. Therefore, Christ ascended into heaven by his own power, first of all by his divine power, and secondly by the power of his glorified soul moving his body at will. Did that make sense?
Translation, please.
The very end of it made sense.
Oh, okay,
Oh,
so
good, I'm
what he's
glad you got
saying
it.
is that, and this is where, I geek out on this stuff because it's really interesting. Because you got this fascinating person, Jesus, who is all human and all divine, right? So he's saying principally, hey, he's divine. He can do whatever he wants. So he ascends by the divine power. But he said, when every person in heaven, once we get our bodies back, our bodies will be perfectly obedient to our rational mind. I think we've talked about this.
Yeah, we have.
So if I say I want to be in my office, the very will of me being in the office puts me there.
And isn't that what happens to angels too? They can
Yes,
will
they
to be
can.
there.
But both our bodies, yeah,
Without
yeah.
bodies,
So
right.
they're by their power, they'll be there. So we
We talked about angels.
Yeah,
and-
we
Yeah.
become
whenever
angelic.
that's-
And so what he's saying is that Jesus could have done it two ways. Because he's human and he has a human soul and a human mind, reason, he could do it that way, but he doesn't have to because he's God. And so, anyways, all right. So that kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's not too obtuse. All right. So now, did Christ ascend above all the heavens? Now, this is interesting because this is implying that
There's heavens above the heavens.
there are levels of
Of
heaven.
heaven, yeah,
right?
like
Remember when we learned about the angels that there could be like seraphim humans. At least that's my reading of it. Like there's
different levels in heaven.
Yeah,
Yes.
right. So some people could just skimp in, just like by the hair of their teeth get into heaven. But yeah, you're heaven. You're going to be perfectly happy according to your capacity. But we don't want to just barely get into heaven.
Yeah,
you
that's
know.
right.
So now it says whether Christ's body ascended every spiritual creature, which is interesting because he's saying, okay, in heaven there's all these levels. Now, including the angels, right?
Yeah.
So where is Jesus? Because he's got a body, and by nature, angels are higher than us, right? Because angels are pure spirit. But now you got Jesus, who just happens to be God, but has this body. So where does he go? In the
I think he's got to go where he wants to go. He's going to go where he wants to go. That's a great question.
Okay,
Yeah.
so here's what he says. He says, the next slide here, the more exalted place is due to the nobler subject, whether it be a place according to bodily contact as regard bodies, or whether it be by way of spiritual contact as regards spiritual substances. Okay, spiritual substances are angels. Thus, a heavenly place, which is the highest of places, is becomingly due to spiritual substances. So he's saying the highest place should be the angels. since they are in the highest order of substances. Okay, did you know that you're a substance? William Kirkendall is a substance. Did you know that, Cecil Anderson? You're
I
a substance?
did know that I was a substance. How do you feel about that, William? Now that
I
you're
never thought about that before. That's interesting.
well, now that you're 18 years old, you can
Now
go
you're
on.
a substance.
I am a substance.
Substance, yeah.
They should have birthday cards like that.
Yeah.
Happy birthday,
Happy birthday,
substance.
dear substance. Okay, so although Christ's body is beneath spiritual substances, the angels, if we weigh the conditions of its corporeal nature, nevertheless, it surpasses all spiritual substances in dignity when we call to mind its dignity of union, whereby it is united personally with God. Consequently, owing to this very fittingness, a higher place is due to it above every spiritual creature. Hence, Gregory says in a homily on the Ascension that he who has made all things was by his own power raised up above all things. So, by nature, a body is lower than the angels, but since Jesus is like God, he gets higher. Okay, because of the dignity of being God, with who has assumed human nature. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's okay. Anybody else got any comments?
So let me real quick. Forrest asked the question of, doesn't Scripture say that men are above angels? And I'm currently trying to figure out exactly which verse, because that does sound familiar to me. There is a verse from 1 Corinthians 6:3 that says, "Do you not know that we will judge angels?" And then I'm trying to think. I feel like there's another one possibly, but if that's the one that you're referring to, Forrest, let me know.
It says in Scripture, in reference to Jesus, I thought it said that for a while was made lower than the angels. Didn't it say that? I need somebody to pull up that thing, because I thought that, it was talking about Jesus's humility, where, and again, if Forrest can dig up that precise, because I know what he's talking about. There are places in Scripture, a lot of places, in fact, where men are being compared to angels. Thomas will say in the Summa that in some ways angels are more noble than humans, but in some ways we are, because we can beget, like God begets. The Father generates the Son, and the Father and the Son, through the Father and the Son processes the Holy Spirit, and so in that way, it's comparing to how we are able to beget, children, and angels can't do that. They can't have children. So, anyways, yeah, I'll need a little bit more help with that.
There's a verse also in, it's in Hebrews saying that you made them a little lower than the angels.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's
so you made them lower than the angels.
It's a little conflicting. So Forrest, if you have that verse, please let us know.
But there also is, where I think that Lucifer rebelled because he was going to be asked to honor Mary and Jesus, and I think that's where he said, "I will not obey, or I will not submit.
Serve. Yeah.
I will not serve."
Yeah,
there you go. Yeah. So he's like, heck no. I mean, that's like me saying, "Hey, I'm going to bring this." Guinea pig and I want you to bow down to the guinea pig, and you're like, forget that, because you're higher, you're nobler than the guinea pig, but you're being asked to do something
you're asking to humble yourself.
Yeah,
to
right.
Lower,
And Lucifer wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm going a little bit long here. Final one here. Okay. Whether Christ's ascension is the cause of our salvation. And in this next slide, I thought it was an interesting comparison. Thomas says, as the high priest under the Old Testament entered the holy place to stand before God for the people, so also Christ entered heaven to make intercession for us. As it is said in Hebrews 7, because the very showing of himself in the human nature, which he took with him to heaven, is a pleading for us. So he ascends into heaven. He's got this body, and it's almost like, hey, heaven, Father, don't forget about these awesome people down there. They got bodies like me. I'm interceding for them because Christ is the one intercessor, as it says in Scripture. Okay, so, anyways, there you go. So you feel a little more confident about the ascension, or a little bit more confused? Don't answer that.
I was going to say, how do you want me to answer this, Dave? To be honest, it's not something, obviously we have a beautiful feast in the church that we celebrate the Ascension on, but I guess it's something that at least I don't think about as often as you think about the resurrection and the crucifixion. You just don't think about the Ascension, because it's kind of like Jesus came and then he died, and then he resurrected, and then and a little bit later he left again. He left, quote unquote. It's funny too because I feel like a while ago I saw some video. I somehow ended up, my YouTube algorithm was putting a bunch of Muslim videos in my way, and I was like, okay. And I remember this girl. She was a convert from Christianity to Muslim, and she was, clearly was not a very practicing Christian, because she's like, I have a great question that Christians can't answer, and she's like, if Jesus came and conquered the world and all this, and where are all his descendants now? Where is he? Who are the relatives of Jesus now? And this whole thing, and I was like, did you forget about the part about the resurrection? Because she's like, because he goes, he continued to live on and died later on, and I'm like. I was like, did you forget the Ascension? I was like, she really thought that was a really good gotcha question.
Yeah.
And I was like, maybe continue reading the Bible.
Do a little more digging. Yeah. And I think also the Ascension is different because, the Passion led up to the death of Christ, and even though Christ had said he would rise again, he rose, and there really weren't any witnesses of the actual resurrection. Were there? I mean, even the guards. And Mary Magdalene came later, but he spoke to her. But how did that work? He spoke to her, and then he rose. She didn't witness him rising, did she?
No.
I don't think anyone did witness him rising, which is kind of interesting because the fruit of that mystery is faith. So.
Yeah. So, but anyways, with the Ascension, he had been mingling with the disciples for 40 days, and talking to them and teaching them, and it must have been kind of sad. That to see him go, and even in a different kind of emotion than I think the resurrection, because there weren't the witnesses. It was really kind of shocking, and I don't know. It's a whole different dynamic, I think, with the Ascension. Yeah. Okay. Well, we went a little bit long in that segment, but that's okay. So let's take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to introduce you to 19th century Danish philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, a very fascinating feature. So, a philosopher. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. This is Back to the Father here on the Guadalupe Radio Network and all of our social media sites. I know there have been some comments and talking about those Bible verses and the angels and humans, and thank you very much for those. I'm going to push those to the last segment when we're going to have open discussion. Also, if you would like to call, you can call us and be part of the show. Last week, we had a great call from Laura in Dallas. The phone number, 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424. Hold off on the call, though, until the next segment, because then I'll be able to have you on. All right, let me tell you a little bit about 19th century philosopher Soren Kierkegaard. I'm very interested in your thoughts on him. So the first slide shows that he is a 19th century Danish philosopher. Okay, he lived in the time of Romanticism, which kind of was defined as a bit of a less emphasis on reason, like in the Enlightenment, and more on emotion. You know, the literature figures of the Romantic age, like Dickens and I think Shelley would have been in that age, were more romantic, more emotion based. Okay, I think this is important when we talk about Kierkegaard. His father Michael was deeply and sternly religious. And his father, it is said, spoke of there being a curse on the family. And 5 of Soren's 6 siblings died when they were very young. And so it's thought, you imagine if your father, you grow up and your father's talking about there being a curse on the family. And some people think it was because his father had an affair. Or not an affair, but he had premarital sex with his second wife because his first wife died. And so his father, being very scrupulous, said, there's going to be a curse in our family. And then all of a sudden, your siblings all start dropping like flies. Imagine the psyche of that. Imagine what that would do to a young man like Soren Kierkegaard when you see 5 of your 6 siblings die after your dad saying there's a curse in the family. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind. Soren said he was born old. He never had fun. He never had a carefree childhood. All right, he got engaged once, okay, and this plays a lot into the psyche of Soren Kierkegaard. He called off the engagement. He just couldn't do it. Okay, he just said, I'm not cut out for this. And I think as we talk more about his philosophy, you maybe understand it. He has this interesting quote. He says, "If you marry, you'll regret it. If you do not marry, you will also regret it. Whether you laugh at the world's follies or weep at them, you will regret both." He also said, if you hang yourself, you'll regret it. If you don't hang yourself, you will regret it. Okay, so this...
What a cheery guy.
This gets into the mindset of Soren Kierkegaard, as you see here, focused on topics of death and angst. And this is a really Christian, religious guy. Okay, so how can you be so morbid and so morose and still claim to be a Christian? Well, because he saw the life as having to make this big decision, and the decision creates angst. Okay, it's like you've got this big decision to make. Have you ever had a decision where you can't decide what to do? Okay, do I marry this person or do I not? And I see a lot of reasons not to marry him. I see a lot of reasons to marry him. And instead of making a decision, you're just in constant limbo, and it's creating a lot of anxiety. And that's Soren Kierkegaard. Okay, the decisions of life, the responsibility that we have, drove him crazy. Okay, he often wrote under pseudonyms, and he was also well known for writing a book under a pseudonym and then writing into the local newspaper and criticizing that book under a different name, and he almost always criticized his own books. So the guy had a great sense of humor. Many people say if you read, and I actually want to read the book Either Or, because they say it's really funny, it's very morbid, very morose. But anyways, okay, next slide. Okay, he was considered the first existentialist philosopher. And an existentialist philosopher sees the world through himself, okay, like, as kind of like a personal perspective of how I as an individual am going to work out my salvation, how I am going to become who I am. We see existentialism very, very prominent in the world today, where people create themselves into their image of what they want to be, okay? And he was among existentialists, he was one of the better ones, because the ones that followed after him were much worse, okay? Highly critical of organized religion and churchmen whom he didn't believe were truly Christian. All right, he said subjectivity is truth and truth is subjectivity. Okay, that has to do with being from the perspective of the subject. Okay, from the perspective of the individual person. Okay, we each have to work out things ourselves. Okay, so Cecil and me and William don't have one set way of, reaching. Of course, I don't believe this, but this is what he believed. Okay, you don't follow the church, you don't follow teachings of an organized religion, according to Kierkegaard. You got it. Everybody's got to do something different. Okay, on their own way. Okay, individuals' lived experience. Okay, so he influenced Nietzsche, Heidegger, Sartre. Okay, none of these guys were all that great. Okay, focus on the individual's lived experience. Now, if you just look at the titles of his books, you'll get an idea of the kind of guy he is. Okay, Fear and Trembling, The Concept of Anxiety, Either Or, and The Sickness Unto Death. Okay, does this sound like a cheery guy?
No.
He said anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. Okay, so you see where he is here. He's like, okay, all of the onus of responsibility is on me. I've got to make this big decision, and it's driving me crazy. Okay, because the freedom that I experience as an individual, as an existentialist, it's making me very anxious. Okay, I already mentioned that he was responding to Hegel's philosophy, and he didn't like it. He didn't like Immanuel Kant because it was too rational. Okay, all right. So the next slide, his book Either Or. Okay, here's what he said. He said that a person has to make a decision. Okay, this is why there's the either or. You can either live what he called the aesthetic life. The aesthetic life was a life basically of hedonism, okay, where you pursue pleasures, whether it be carnal pleasures or intellectual pleasures, but you're basically living for yourself, okay? And he, like Pascal, said, this is a horrible life. Okay, it's a life of drudgery. It's a life of boredom. Remember, Pascal said all the problems in the world come for a man trying to, that not being able to sit in a room by himself.
Yeah.
Okay, so Kierkegaard would kind of agree. Okay, this is an empty life. But he said, or you can live what's called an ethical life. An ethical life means you step outside of yourself. You raise a family. You become a politician. You do something that's not just based on pleasing yourself, either intellectually or in a carnal, physical way. Okay, so he said you got to make that decision, either or. You can't do both. Okay, so every single one of us has to make that decision. Are you going to live carnally, or are you going to live the ethical life? William Kierkegaard. Okay, you got to make a decision. Okay, but then he says, okay, if you decide to do the ethical life, there's still one more step. And this is the goal in life is to live what he calls the religious life, which I'll explain in the next thing. This is where it gets really interesting, okay? A personal relationship with God, the highest plane of existence, he said. Now, the problem with all this, and I have the quote from G.K. Chesterton on the bottom, is that, everybody who reads Kierkegaard says, yeah, he's funny, but this is a very troubled individual. Okay, this is not a balanced guy. This is a guy that's living with a lot of angst. No, I don't know that anybody would say that reading Aquinas. I don't think anybody would read Aquinas and say, wow, this guy's really troubled. In fact, Aquinas only uses first-person pronouns like 5 times in the Summa. I remember reading in the Summa, and I saw the word I, and I was like, whoa, because he never does that, hardly ever. He's not focusing on himself. He's teaching so that all people can understand God and understand human nature. Kierkegaard is focused on himself, and I think that's the problem. I mean, do you know anybody who's entirely self-centered and they live their entire lives thinking about themselves? They typically to be pretty unhappy people. So Aquinas didn't say the sensual life or the ethical life. He thought the two could be one and the same. You can enjoy a nice meal. You can enjoy, the pleasures of life and going out and, having fun and going to parks and, and having intellectual stimulation. And that's okay. But then you can also be an ethical person. So with it's not an either or in Aquinas. It's both. You can do both. And that's why G.K. Chesterton said, it is when we see this gigantic figure against this vast and cosmic background that we realize first that he was the only optimist theologian, and secondly, that Catholicism is the only optimist theology. Catholicism and Christianity is inherently optimistic. We don't have to choose between the aesthetic life and the ethical life. Okay, we can have both. we can enjoy life. We can think it's great, and we can also, be on the way to heaven. Okay, now it gets really interesting. Okay, the last slide here. He wrote another book called Fear and Trembling. Okay, so if somebody wants to enter into this religious aspect of their life, Kierkegaard says you have to make a leap of faith. But the thing is that the leap of faith can have no rational calculation and no criterion. Okay, it can't be based on reason. That's why he did that. He thought philosophy and theology were incompatible. He hated the 5 proofs for the existence of God, because he says if you can prove that God exists, then there's no need for faith. Okay, so why would you believe in something that you've proved exists? And so he would be definitely against Aquinas. And this is the funny part. The 2 people that he loved in Scripture were Abraham and Job, because he said in those 2 men's cases, their leap of faith made absolutely no rational sense. Okay, it goes like this. Abraham was promised by God to become the father of many nations, right? And which means you have a son, and your son has sons, and his son has sons. So that was the promise. And then God comes to him and says, oh, by the way, kill that son of yours, right? Makes no sense. Okay, it makes absolutely no sense. And so he said at that moment, Abraham could not use reason. He could not say, this makes sense, that I can be the father of many nations and kill my son. It doesn't make sense, because he would have to raise Isaac from the dead. And so, but Abraham still did it. Okay, absolute leap of faith. Job also, his situation made no sense. Here's this loving God that took away his kids, took away his wife, took away his livelihood, his livestock, everything. And his friends are trying to reason with him, explain why it's going on. And Job never gave up his faith, right? But it wasn't based on reason. It made no sense. But Kierkegaard says that's the kind of faith. He compares it to being on the edge of a cliff and God saying, jump. Okay, and all you're thinking is, I'm going to jump and I'm going to hit that bottom and I'm going to die. But he says, you go anyways, okay? And because you can't reason it. You can't say, this doesn't make any sense. God wouldn't ask me to do this. You do it anyways. So can you see why he would be kind of nerve-wracked? Because he's not able to rely on reason, and he thinks God is going to give him this really irrational type of either-or kind of situation that he has to respond to, but it's not based on reason. In fact, if it's based on reason, it's not faith, according to Kierkegaard. Okay? Luther said Christians should pluck out the eyes of their reason. Tertullian said, I believe because it is absurd. Kierkegaard agrees with that. He said, believing is absurd, and you can't use reason at all. All right? It's a weird kind of approach, but I use this Mother Angelica line at the bottom, and I'm not aligning Mother Angelica with Kierkegaard, but she has this famous line saying, unless you're willing to do the ridiculous, God won't do the miraculous. That's a little bit Kierkegaardian. Okay, I love that quote. I love, if you ever read Mother Angelica's biography, she did some crazy stuff.
Really crazy stuff.
But she totally trusted God. She wasn't going off, killing, willing to kill somebody.
But she was doing things that everyone told her wasn't going to work.
Yeah, so there's a certain, and again, there's always some good in somebody like this. And I can kind of see his point a little bit, where if you've got it all reasoned out and it all makes sense, there isn't that much faith. It's kind of like Eucharistic miracles. If Eucharistic miracles happened all the time, transubstantiation wouldn't require any faith, right? Mm-hmm. But the faith is that this looks like bread. That looks like wine. This is kind of crazy to think that this is actually Jesus Christ. That's kind of crazy. But that's the type of faith where we are called to have. All right? So anyways, interesting philosophy. That's Soren Kierkegaard. Again, he wasn't Catholic. I think, and he was a very troubled man. I think the way that he processed things, probably based on his childhood, his dad says they're cursed. He did die young. If you look at that, he only lived to be 42. These guys all die young.
Wow.
Yeah, they Aquinas died at 49, Kierkegaard at 42, Pascal died young. Nietzsche went crazy when he was in his 40s. Last 10 years of his life, he was basically like a vegetable. All right, so there's Kierkegaard.
Wow.
So, anyways, let me know your thoughts. We're going to take a quick little break now, and then I want to know what you guys think and what you think out there in social media land. If one person calls us, I'll tell you that'll just make our day. 877-757-9424. 877-757-9424. This is Back to the Father. Quick break. We'll be back. All right, we're back. This is Back to the Father, a production of the Guadalupe Radio Network, and I have done a lot of talking over the last 45 minutes, so I'm going to turn it over to Sissel and William and you to discuss either the Ascension of the Lord or Soren Kierkegaard. So, Sissel, your thoughts?
Well, yeah, he's a very interesting guy. I want to just read more about him because we've talked about him in the past shows, and I thought he was fascinating from the sense that he was a strong Christian, but he's definitely had some issues. He struggles. Mm-hmm. But the biggest thing I was thinking while you were talking, describing his life, and especially how morose he was, it makes me think, but also very humorous to an extent, but like dark humor.
Yeah,
almost.
Definitely.
You know what it sounds like a lot is Gen Z, my generation. And I guess, William, you're probably in Gen Z too, right? I think so. Yeah. You can let me know if you agree with this or not, but I feel like this generation has a very dark sense of humor. And sometimes even I don't even notice that I'll adapt some of it. And sometimes even between me and my sister who's older than me, I'll make it my brother and I will find something funny and she doesn't find it funny. And you're like, oh, hold on a second. But we have a very kind of morose sense of humor, I think.
I would agree.
So he would have fit in very well right now. But that was one observation I had of him. And also with his whole all about focus on the self. And talking about, everyone has to kind of figure out their faith for themselves is so Protestant. It's such a Protestant thing to say. Because I remember feeling that a lot when I was Protestant, that I had several even Sunday school teachers basically saying that, oh, that's kind of what you got to do when you reach, 16, 17, 18. You got to read the Bible and, some of these early, Christians and figure out what denomination fits your belief. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so much work.
Very individualistic, yeah.
I'm like, that's so much work. It's so much pressure to
point out one real quick thing that I'd love to get William's thoughts as well. I was listening to Teresa Tomio's show this morning, and she had a lady on, Reggie Littlejohn, and talking about the situation in China and how young people in China have basically checked out. They're not having babies. They've given up because during COVID, the government oppressed them so much, kept them all isolated, and it's just so oppressive over there in communist China that I guess one kind of famous saying from some young person said, "We are the last generation." And that kind of caught on. So people don't see a future. They think it's like it's doomsday. It's over. It's kind of like Kierkegaard's father saying this family is cursed, and then you see 5 of your siblings die before 10 years old. All you're thinking about is, I'm going to drop dead. And so maybe that has to do, maybe there's a moroseness among the young people. They just don't see a future. They don't see, I've heard people say, do you even think that the world's going to be around 50 years from now? I do. I'm very optimistic. But anyways, William, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, William.
First existentialist philosopher, that was interesting. How the existentialists believe that an individual works out their own salvation and who they want to be. It's, again, as I've said before, I see the circulation with a lot of the more modern philosophers. We see them pulling away the difference between a lot of the modern ones and the older ones, like, say, Aristotle and Aquinas. You see that the modern ones are pulling away from authority, and they want to do their own thing. They want to be that individual who creates salvation. We talked a couple of weeks ago about Nietzsche and the Superman, and creating yourself and who you want to be. You're the individual and all of that, but at the same time, you're rebelling from authority, and that's not a good thing. I thought it was interesting when you said he didn't like Immanuel Kant because he was too rational. I don't know how you can be too rational, but that's interesting.
Well, there's a whole group of philosophers called empiricists, like Locke and Berkeley and Hume, who rejected, reason.
Interesting.
Yeah, a guy like Hume thought everything was based on perceptions, and so reason is not like a given among philosophers.
Right. So rationalism is basically making a decision based off of reason, correct? So empiricism, it's opposite, making a decision based off of, I guess, past experience. Is that kind of the
sensible experience.
Sensible
So
experience.
that
Okay.
we know things through our senses. Whereas like Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. And he came to the conclusion that he can't entirely trust his senses.
Okay.
So he's a rationalist, and Spinoza, Leibniz, these are like the three rationalist, big famous philosophers. And then the empiricists came along, but again, as I was saying earlier, Aquinas and Aristotle would say, why do you have to pick between the two?
Yeah.
We're both.
Right.
Aquinas said we come to first know things through our senses, but then it informs the intellect. And then you have universals and you have particulars. The senses are aligned with particulars, and the reason with universals. And then of course, Occam denies universals, as we
Right.
talked about.
Right.
And so it's all jumbled up, but it's like you don't have to choose between them. You can do both.
Right,
You know?
right.
No, and I think that some things that Kierkegaard is saying, were very valid. About that you have to have that faith. The faith of that is so beautiful about, being able to believe without, any proof and stuff like that. But like you're saying, it's the balance. You gotta have both of them. Because reason is not, a bad thing.
Yeah, it did make me think about the whole proofs through the existence of God.
Right.
Is that, but again, Thomas would fundamentally disagree. He'd say that, and again, I don't know what Kierkegaard would say about, do you have to have faith to even believe that God exists? Thomas doesn't think so. Thomas thinks that you can know that God exists through reason. I'm guessing that Kierkegaard doesn't agree with that.
Probably
that
not.
it's a leap of faith, and then also that God might ask you to do something crazy. But how do you know it isn't a demon asking you to do that?
Right.
Jump off this cliff or kill your brother or kill your. That's crazy.
I almost feel like
Yeah.
it's something. It seems really simple, but like that they just simply had their brains work so differently, and I think that's part of the problem. Like St. Thomas Aquinas was very we could consider like a left brain. Very this is reason. Okay, that I believe. That, and Kierkegaard was definitely more of a feeling and okay, faith. I'm just gonna take that jump and so I think that's why it's beautiful that we have both faith and reason, because some of our brains, we just connect things. So you could list a bunch of facts to me and I'd be like, okay, that makes sense, but then when you have to take that, you do have to have that faith element in it.
Yeah.
I have a couple comments I wanted to catch us up on real quick. So we're talking a little bit about the generation of being very, it's so over, and that and Annabelle saying there's no hope. It's so sad, and there's lack of hope is why so many are into drugs and committing suicide. And it's sad that our culture is not making that connection as to. I always wonder why is this generation seem so sad all the time? You're always trying to figure out what is it, and I don't know.
I do
There's so
think
many
if I'll jump in
Sure,
real quickly,
go for it.
that I think a lot of them, this is where Kierkegaard is right. A lot of young people, I think, choose that aesthetic life rather than the ethical life. They want all the social media, I think, really promotes this, about being famous and, whereas it's more of like, well, what about service to your fellow man? What about giving of
very
yourself?
simple things.
What about sacrifice?
Right.
Yeah.
And the thing is that there are very few people can actually achieve that high level of quote unquote satisfaction of having enough money to do whatever you want, having enough clout to get wherever you want. And so you're just going to be spending the rest of your life really sad and depressed because you're going to be trying to chase that. And I'm like, it's okay. I was thinking about this the other day. Like, we have a big thing in our culture about success and like reaching a certain point and this, that, and the other. I'm like, it's okay to just like not be amazing at everything. You know what I mean? Like, it's okay to just, I was thinking about, there was a word I was thinking of, like, we're called to excellence, like in Christ, but we don't have to be excellent. You know what I mean? Like, we don't have to always be that top tier. We don't have to all be CEOs. We don't have to be like whatever it may be. We're all called to excellence, whatever God's calling us to do.
Well, I mean, I eulogized my stepfather back in November, and the theme that I gave was that he was a good man. He wasn't a great man. He didn't seek greatness. But he was a good man. And that we need more good people. We don't need more great people. There's enough great people in the world.
Yeah.
We need good people. We just need people who, go to work, support a family, do their job, are nice to their neighbors. They mow their yard. But everybody's like, no, I gotta have a million likes on Facebook. I mean, it's like, no, just be
good.
Just be a good person. Okay, it looks like Mark Lowe was commenting.
Yes, Mark Lowe was commenting, definitely. I have a couple questions. First, real quick. By the way, Adrian's saying, I'm called to be the king of Texas. I don't know about everyone else. All right.
He's not listening. No, you're called to be good.
And then Boris asked the question of where does nominalism fit in? So if you want to answer that, maybe while...
nominalism fit in?
Like,
we did a whole show on nominalism. Yeah. Nominalism is just the denial of forms. It's that things, that particular things in the world don't really have any real meaning to them. It's just a name that we attach to them. I did a whole show. Was it last week?
It was last week.
Yeah, last week, Forrest. The whole thing was on. I also have and I'm very proud of this. Speaking of YouTube, I actually did about a 14-minute video on realism versus nominalism. Forrest, if you want to go check that out, it explains it, I think, pretty well, if I may say, about the big time problem of nominalism. So you can just go to my YouTube channel and there's a video there.
Okay, awesome. And then also we had Jeremy was tuning in. He said he was looking forward to the Kierkegaard segment. He was required to read in 2 classes at his program at Holy Apostles. And also Mark was complimenting you on saying, for not saying both and, you just said both, because apparently that's something that a lot of people say. And then we have a few people, putting up Adrian for King Adrian the First. So
that's kind of a kingly name, isn't it, Adrian?
King Adrian the First. Yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, I think Queen Cecil is also great. And then, he's saying in terms of rationalism. Forrest is following up on his comment.
Oh, so the connection between rationalism. Well, I mean, yeah, the nominalists would deny reason's role in coming to know things. It's more. I don't think nominalists would be rational, and but then again, like William of Ockham, he was a scholastic. That's a good question. I don't know that everything fits into tidy compartments where, the key component of nominalism is the denial of forms. And that's a huge thing because it also is a denial of natures. And if a grasshopper doesn't have a nature and it's just something we call a grasshopper, then we don't know what a grasshopper is supposed to do. How does it fulfill its nature? How does it become a good grasshopper? And how I know, and that has to do with teleology. It has to do with things acting for an end, for a purpose. Nominalism throws everything out, and it's really, really bad. And again, so hopefully, that helps a little bit. Okay, thank you.
I think I'm caught up on all of comments. If you have anything else you want to say, please throw them in the chat and I will grab them. It's fun to jump between all of the different social media
I know.
sites. It's
Multitasking.
It is. I do have a couple of facts about Denmark because that's where Kierkegaard is from. All the fun facts that I found about Kierkegaard, you kind of already mentioned. So,
Oh, yeah.
so
Well, that means I gave a thorough presentation,
yes,
right?
I really don't, or I just
Okay.
didn't look very deeply.
So, and, I see William's kind of chomping at the bit
Oh, do
here.
you have
He's
something to
on a
say?
winning streak.
Oh, that's right. Although
Yeah.
I wasn't here last
Well,
week. So.
you mean
Did-
when I
did-
won that one time?
What happened last week? Didn't I ask I asked some trivia about
You did. Yeah, me and Manny competed.
who
I think.
won?
I can't remember. I don't know if we were
it
keeping track.
came down to
Let
the
me-
last question. Remember, it was
Did it?
like it was. I was asking questions about. I don't know.
Let me do this real quick because I
Okay.
know that our
Yeah.
Spanish station tries to put on something right around 2:00 and we're over time.
Oh, okay.
So really quickly, how old is the flag of Denmark?
The flag of Denmark.
It's considered the oldest one in the world.
Oh wow.
Does anyone know what the Danish flag looks like, by the way?
No.
Okay. It's basically a white cross on a red flag.
Okay. I'm going to say 1,200 years.
1,200 years.
I have no idea.
1,400 years.
That's okay. You all went really hard on that. No, it's 800 years.
800,
803 years
okay.
this year, I think, actually.
Okay.
All right. And then also, how do they spell? You should maybe remember this because I did wear a hat with it on at one time because I did go to Denmark. How do they spell it in Danish?
The country Denmark?
Yep.
Denmark. I have no idea.
I'd have no idea.
It's just Denmark. Just the place.
Oh,
the,
Denmark.
the-
Okay.
Denmark.
I always think of Hamlet when I think of Denmark because he was the Prince of Denmark,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And this might be shocking and maybe it's really saddening to y'all, but the Danish pastries are not from Denmark.
man.
Where are they from?
Germany.
Okay. What are you going to say?
Somewhere around Germany. I'll go with Norway.
All right. All right. It is Vienna, so Austria.
Oh,
So you're
Austria.
close, Dave.
Okay.
Close.
Okay.
All right. Those are your three fascinating facts about
All right.
Denmark. And by the way, Forrest was asking, is he Dutch or Danish? According to my research, Danish.
Okay.
Yeah.
And all right. So next week, I'm thinking about which philosopher to do. I'm thinking about maybe Hegel.
Ooh.
There's part of me that maybe wants to do Sartre. There's so many that we can still do.
Yeah.
Wittgenstein, a more modern philosopher. I'm kind of jumping around a bit. There's also a guy named Foucault that is interesting. And there's also deconstructionism. Have you heard about that?
No, I've never heard of that.
I've heard of deconstructionism.
Yeah. A guy named Derrida, who's not Doritos, Derrida. Deconstructionism, that might be an important one. That might be a good one to do. So anyways, thanks everybody for joining us. This has been Back to the Father. Thank you, Sissel. Thank you, William. Thank you out there for all the comments and participation in the program. And we will be back next Friday for the next Back to the Father. God bless you. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.